How's it going, crew? In this video, I'm going to show you the simplest and cheapest method I know to sharpen your woodworking tools. It can also be knives, axes, anything that has metal can be sharpened with this method. Super simple. Let's get straight to the point, and I'll show you what we have here on the table. The only thing we're going to need is sandpaper. This is wet sandpaper. You can find it in any hardware store. A little bit of water and a flat surface. Maybe that's the most important thing. In this case, I'm going to use a piece of glass that was part of a shelf, but you can use melamine or a granite surface. It could even be plywood as long as it's really smooth and flat. The important thing is that it's flat and not soft. For this demonstration, we're going to use a regular everyday chisel. And let's imagine that the chisel is completely dull so we can go through the whole process. This is the method I'm going to use and teach you. It's something very personal. There are many ways to sharpen the tool. There are Japanese stones, for example, the Tormek machine, which I have used and is more professional. There are people who like diamond stones, and there are other people who also like this cheaper, simpler method, which is with wet sandpaper. But everyone is looking for exactly the same thing, to achieve a good edge. What is an edge? Basically, it's where two metal surfaces meet, in this case, up here. This area is called the apex. The cleaner or more polished the union between those two faces is, in this case, the back of the chisel and the main bevel, the sharper a tool will be. Of course, there are different angles. Some people like to make a micro bevel here. These are things I've shown in other videos as well. But the idea of this video is for you to learn the simplest, easiest, and cheapest way to get a tool sharp. I'm not going to go too deep into the science. What grit of sandpaper do I like to start with? If the tool is very, very dull, I like to start with a 100 grit. Keep in mind that sandpapers made for wood have a different grit. 100 grit wood sandpaper is not the same as 100 grit wet sandpaper. These tend to have a slightly different grit. So to start, 100 grit. We're going to put a little bit of water here on this glass, just so the sandpaper sticks and doesn't move while we're sharpening. A good idea would also be, in fact, I'm going to do it, to clamp this piece of glass since it's a bit slippery. All right. So we put a little bit of water here. And we put the sandpaper. The first thing we have to do is check if the back of the chisel is flat. The area that we need to be flat is more or less half a centimeter from here to the edge. We don't want this part to be concave or convex, since the area that's going to make contact with the bevel to achieve the apex is going to be more or less this area. It's going to take us several years with a chisel to get all the way here to this part. So, what do we do to check if the back of the chisel is flat? We can put a little bit of water here. You just run the chisel like this. Applying pressure here near the tip. The most important thing is to keep the chisel flat. We can move it forward and backward. We can also make a small circular motion. The important thing is that we keep the back of the chisel flat and that we're applying pressure more or less in this area. You'll notice right away when you turn the chisel over where you're removing material. If you have an area that's not shiny, it means you still need to remove material from that part. Some cheap chisels tend to come pretty rough here on the back, and you have to work on it a bit before you start sharpening the bevel. If you have trouble seeing the areas where you're removing material with the sandpaper, you can use a Sharpie or any marker or pencil you have and mark it. Here, you could even do it with a graphite pencil, and then, once you remove some material, you'll notice it. If we're removing, for example, here, everything we marked came off. That means this chisel is ready. This part is perfectly flat now, so we can move on to the bevel next. I recommend that you feel here with your finger for the famous burr, which is when the edge turns over if you feel this burr along the entire edge. It means that the entire back of the chisel has made contact with the sandpaper, and we would be ready to work on the bevel. I hope you can barely see it. There's a shiny line near the edge. Well, that's the famous burr. It's this metallic part that turned inward, like a wave or a small curl. Now comes perhaps the most complicated part, which requires practice, but it's not that difficult. Don't be scared, and it's about finding where the bevel sits flat on the sandpaper. I recommend that you follow the bevel angle that came from the factory on the chisel you're using. Don't fight against it because it will take you a long time to establish a new angle. So take advantage of the bevel that's already made, that's already set from the factory, and respect it. A trick to know when you have the bevel properly resting against the sandpaper is to start lifting it up. I'm going to start flat like this, and I'm going to start lifting it up like this, and look what happens. I slowly lift the chisel, and there. It's like a little water came out right on the edge. Look, and that's it. Done. So, as you start lifting, as soon as a little water comes out, try to lock your wrist and stay in that position. This is the most complex part since at first it's hard to maintain that angle while moving back and forth. But look, I'll show you from the side how I do it. It's easier than it seems, but it's normal to not get it right at first. So we find the angle. I like to use these two fingers to apply a little bit of pressure here near the bevel. And I have my other hand behind with my wrists as locked as possible. Both wrists are locked so that we don't change the angle as we move the chisel. At first, you're going to feel a bit tense and feel like it's not working for you. That's totally normal. Later, once you get the hang of it, you'll be able to relax. And in woodworking in general, things done in a relaxed way always turn out better. But at first, since you're nervous and not sure what you're doing, it's a bit hard to relax. Now, if you change the angle a little, it's not the end of the world. You just have to keep turning the chisel and see which area you're removing material from. If it's hard for you to see this, just like we did with the back part, you can scratch it a little with a Sharpie or a marker so you can see where you're wearing away material. You'll feel it because when you move over there, it's like the chisel will want to cut the paper. So you have to be right at the point just before the lower part of the bevel starts cutting the paper. Another thing, if you feel like you're going too much to one side, what can happen is that you lose the squareness here. The idea is that the side of the chisel and the edge should have a 90-degree angle. You can check that with a machinist square, right? So if you start taking off too much from one side, you'll probably lose that angle. So it's also important that you keep the pressure centered from side to side. So angle, locked wrists, pressure on the chisel, and gently forward and backward. Water, I recommend you use water here, don't use oil. The water is simply so that the metal particles come off the sandpaper, and the sandpaper keeps cutting. Here I can already feel the burr. I'm going to keep going a little longer. Perfect. Now I feel the burr along the entire edge. That means the little curl from this bevel has moved to the back side. That's what we wanted to achieve. We're done with the 100 grit, and we're going to move on to the 240 grit. These numbers are just for reference. If you have a 300 or a 200, you can use those too. Or if you don't have a 100 and you have a 120, that's fine as well. Try to stick to it if you want to use this method, right? Try to stay close to these numbers. No, it's not important for them to be exact. We pour a little bit of water here, and we're going to put on this new 240 grit sandpaper.
40.
A little bit of water. And we're going to make a couple of passes on the backside since we have the burr here from the previous sharpening. Let's put a little more water here. And I like to make short movements here, applying pressure here, keeping the chisel flat. With the 100 grit, we're supposed to have already flattened this part. Now we're simply, so to speak, achieving a finer surface on the back and removing the burr. Those are the two things we're doing. It's already been flattened, we're just moving up the grit. And with that, in fact, it would be enough. This chisel already had the back polished up to 1,200 grit before. But since I'm showing you from scratch, we went back to 100, and now we're moving to 240. And simply by doing this, removing the burr, we should already be able to feel the burr that moved to the other side. You feel it less and less. As you go up in grit, you'll feel the burr less and less. With the coarse grits, the lower grits, you feel it much more. There we have it already. And now we turn the chisel over and do the same thing. We look for the angle. There. And with the wrist locked, we make forward and backward movements. There. I feel the burr. This side still needs a little more here. That's it, thank you. From there, I feel it along the whole edge. We're ready with this grit. That's how quickly we make progress. Yes, the slowest part is the first part when we have to flatten and set the bevel angle properly. We can remove this sandpaper and move on to the 400 grit. You could move on to a 600 if you have one. I don't know. A 380 is also acceptable. In this case, what I have here is fine. 400. Pour a little bit of water and do the same on the backside. Once you sharpen your chisel, you'll only need to barely touch the backside in future sharpenings. Since the polished part will already be done, so it won't be necessary to do this long process again. In fact, once this chisel is already sharpened, later on in future sharpenings, I just like to sharpen here on the bevel side, and I start right away with a 400 grit. Since the chisel is supposed to already be sharpened, we already have a fine surface. Unless it has received some really serious damage, it wouldn't be necessary to start with such a low grit. We can start right away with the fine grit. Here. You can still feel a slight burr. There we go. And you can barely feel it on the bevel side. We turn the chisel, find the angle, lock our wrists, and we do the same thing. Trying to keep the angle. If you feel like you've lost the angle, stop, reposition, and start again. Perfect, perfect. You can barely feel the burr. If I were only using this chisel, for example, to make mortises and tenons, jobs that are a bit rougher, I think stopping at a 400 grit is more than acceptable. Now, if you're doing finer woodworking, like joinery, for example, if you're cleaning up a dovetail, maybe it's worth going a bit higher. But for general woodworking tasks, I think 400 grit is more than enough. And if you take care of the edge, then you can simply use a piece of leather, which I'll show you later. A small piece of leather to strop the edge, which is like the equivalent of a honing rod or a steel for knives. Have you seen how butchers do it sometimes? Psst, they run the knife over a piece of metal and that's it. That long piece of metal is called a honing rod or steel. And what it does is not remove material. But what that tool, that utensil does, is eliminate the burr from the knife when it folds over to one side. So, to put it that way, it realigns the edge. It's not sharpening or removing material, it's just realigning it. The function of the leather strop, or the leather with polishing compound, is very similar to that of the honing rod. We barely remove any material if we remove any at all, but what we do is realign the edge of the chisel. From my experience, a well-cared-for chisel, one that's treated well, can last 2 or 3 months just with a strop. Just with it. Running it over leather with polishing paste, it can last 2 or 3 months easily. The knives in my kitchen, I run them over the steel and I haven't sharpened them in a year. And they're still really, really good. What does it mean to take care of a chisel? Of course, don't let them fall to the ground. Don't use them on hard surfaces. Always use them with wood and store them properly so they don't bump into each other. There, for example, I cut sandpaper. That means I wasn't careful and the chisel tilted too much. Here, a few final passes on the back to remove the burr. From here, we would already have a chisel. Functional, perfect, with a super sharp edge. It's not Gillette sharp. It could be much better. We haven't stropped it yet, we haven't run it over the leather, but it's already a chisel that works. This is the recipe for the lenga when it was run over. I don't have any polishing paste, but just the leather also helps with stropping. Let's give it a few passes to see if we can make any difference. Look at the technique I'm using here. I hold the chisel like this, in this way. The palm or the hard part of the palm right here against the back of the chisel. And I apply much more pressure than when I'm sharpening, and I only move backward in that direction. Never forward because we're going to cut the leather. And here the angle is not as critical as with the sandpaper. Not here either. I like to vary the angle because otherwise the edge will get too rounded. I like it to stay flat, so still try to keep the angle even if it's not that critical. And then I like to turn the chisel, pressing here pretty firmly, and make passes like this going backwards. Using polishing compound is much more effective and faster, but you can still use just leather. And there. You'll notice that the bevel is going to be much shinier, bright and shiny, and more polished than before. There. We reached up to 400 grit, and we stropped it on the belt, that's all. Look at the difference. It's cutting much, much better now. What we did was the stropping. We completely removed the burr, and we can achieve a clean cut right away just by running it over a regular belt that I think we all have somewhere in the closet. Now, if you want to go with a higher grit, I think you can go from 400 to 1,200 and then use a leather strop. Above 1,200, honestly, I haven't noticed any benefits. I don't think it's worth it. When I started in woodworking, I was kind of obsessed with getting the edge up to 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, even 6,000. And honestly, it was more about showing off than anything else because I never felt any real difference. Later on, over time, I realized that 400 grit and good stropping is more than enough. If you want to give it a little extra, maybe it's worth the effort to go up to a 1,200 or a 1,000 grit. I find it harder to sharpen knives than to sharpen chisels, for example, or hand plane blades. It requires a bit more precision and keeping the angle consistent. Thank you. And another thing that's a bit annoying, for example, what's happening to me here is that because of the handle of this knife, I can't get all the way down here so the edge can rest properly, so I would have to do it from the side here. It can be done, but it's not that comfortable, but you can still do it. I've seen people who like to sharpen like this towards themselves, or rather, pulling it. Go ahead. I prefer this method this way. There. There.
Height.
There. Then I turn around. I try to use these fingers so that the pressure is well distributed along the blade. And wet it. There. It's not my favorite method for sharpening knives. You can do it, yes, but I find it much more suitable for woodworking tools. Anyway, you can still do it. The question I think many of you are asking, is this method good as a long-term method in the workshop? That will depend on each person. It's very subjective, but personally, no. Believe it or not, the cost of sandpaper, even though it's very low, will add up over time. For example, this 400 grit paper, you saw that I already made a little cut in it. It's basically useless now, so I need to buy another one. And it adds up, and in the end, it adds up. So to start with, it's really good, very cheap. Sandpaper is cheap. And to learn how to sharpen, you'll be able to have at least 2 months of practice with very little money spent on materials. So the results and the principles, the most important thing, the principles you use to sharpen with this method are exactly the same ones you'll use later with a more expensive stone. So what I would personally do is start with this method. And once you get the hang of it, move on to diamond stones. I prefer diamond stones because regular stones end up becoming concave. They develop a dip in the middle, requiring a harder stone to fix, which is a hassle. So it's better to just go straight for diamond stones, which won't lose their flatness. And maybe I don't have a DMT diamond stone. It's a good brand, but a bit expensive and honestly too pricey for my taste. So in that case, you'd have to look for a good diamond stone. I can't think of one to suggest to you. Now, if you want to buy a sharpening machine like a Tormek, it's an amazing, amazing machine, but it's also a huge, huge investment. So if you're taking this very seriously, maybe the Tormek is worth it. But to start with, a diamond stone is more than enough. When it comes to diamond stone grits, as you already saw, here we go up to 400 with some good stropping and you'll be set. You'll be just fine. Grits. 250, 400, and 600 could work. That grit progression is really good. And super important, don't forget, a piece of leather, ideally with a bit of polishing compound. The green one works well, but there are other colors with different components. Generally, any polishing compound will work for you. You can see that we didn't use any polishing compound and the chisel still turned out really well. Well, crew, long video, very thorough. I think I gave you all my tips and I hope this video is useful to you. Sending you a hug. Take care, and I'll see you soon in the next video. Bye-bye.